The rain fell like bullets on the streets of Manhattan, each drop exploding against the pavement with a violence that matched the storm brewing inside Victoria Ashford's chest. Her Rolls-Royce glided through the financial district, a capsule of warmth and leather luxury separating her from the chaos outside. She barely glanced up from her phone, where the numbers told their usual story. Another 17 million gained while she sat in traffic. Money had stopped meaning anything years ago. Around the same time, her heart had learned to calculate everything in terms of profit and loss. "Ms. Ashford, there's significant congestion ahead," Marcus, her driver of 12 years, announced from the front seat. His voice carried that particular note of concern she'd learned to ignore. "Take the side route through." Victoria's words dissolved mid-sentence. There, huddled against the stone facade of a closed boutique, was an image that would shatter everything she thought she knew about her perfectly ordered world. A boy, no older than 16, sat cross-legged on the wet concrete. But that wasn't what stopped her breath. In his thin arms, he cradled two bundles wrapped in what looked like torn pieces of a denim jacket. The bundles moved. They were alive. And as lightning split the sky, Victoria saw what made her lean forward, her hand pressed against the window. Tiny fingers, impossibly small, emerging from the makeshift blankets. Twin bobbies, in the arms of a homeless boy, in a storm that was rapidly becoming dangerous. "Stop the car," Victoria whispered. Marcus didn't move. "Ms. Ashford." "I said stop the car." The command came out sharper than she'd intended, but something was happening inside her chest, something she hadn't felt since the accident, since the day she'd lost. No, she wouldn't think about that. Not now, not ever. The Rolls-Royce pulled to the curb with hydraulic precision. Victoria reached for the door handle, and that's when she saw Marcus's face in the rearview mirror. He looked afraid. Not of the storm, but of something else entirely, something he saw in her expression that even she didn't understand yet. Before we continue with what Victoria is about to discover, I need to ask you something. Where in the world are you watching this from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. This story is reaching people everywhere, and I'd love to know where you are right now. Also, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button because what happens next will change everything you think you know about this story. The rain hit Victoria like a physical assault the moment she stepped out. Her Valentino coat, worth more than most people earned in 6 months, was soaked within seconds. But she didn't feel it. Her eyes were locked on the boy, on those impossibly small bundles, on a scene that her mind kept rejecting as impossible. As she approached, the boy looked up. His face was a map of suffering, sunken eyes that had seen too much, cheekbones sharp enough to cut, lips cracked and bleeding from exposure. But it was his eyes that stopped her 3 feet away. They held no hope, no expectation of help. They were the eyes of someone who had learned that the world was a place where miracles didn't happen. "How long have you been out here?" Victoria's voice sounded strange in her own ears, stripped of the commanding tone she used in boardrooms. The boy didn't answer immediately. He looked at her designer coat, her diamond earrings catching the streetlight, her shoes that cost what he probably imagined as a fortune. She watched him calculating whether she was threat or opportunity, and something about that calculation made her want to weep. 3 days, he finally said. His voice was hoarse, probably from crying or screaming or both. "Maybe 4, I lost count." Victoria knelt on the wet concrete, not caring that her coat was now ruined beyond any dry cleaner's ability to save. Up close, the bobbies were even tinier than she'd thought. Newborns, maybe a few weeks old at most. One was crying, a weak mewling sound that barely carried over the rain. The other was too still, too quiet. "These bobbies," Victoria said, her throat suddenly tight. "Where are their parents?" The boy's face crumpled, and for a moment Victoria saw past the premature aging of homelessness to the child he still was. 16, she'd guessed, but now she wondered if he was even that old. 14, 13. "I'm their brother," he said, and the way he said it carried a weight that made Victoria's stomach turn. "I'm all they have left. Here's what I want you to think about while we continue. What would you do if you saw this? Would you stop? Would you keep driving? Drop your honest answer in the comments, because what Victoria does next is something that will shock you." Victoria's mind raced through possibilities, each more horrifying than the last. Runaway? Orphan? Something worse? But before she could ask, the boy shifted, and Victoria saw something that made her blood run cold. On his neck, partially hidden by his soaked collar, was a bruise. Not the kind you get from a fall. The kind that comes from fingers, from someone's hand wrapped around your throat, from someone trying to hurt you. Or worse. "What's your name?" Victoria asked, keeping her voice gentle despite the rage building inside her. "Daniel," the boy said, "Daniel Morrison, and before you call the police or CPS or whatever you're thinking, you need to know something." His eyes locked onto hers with sudden intensity, a desperate clarity that cut through his exhaustion. "If you take these bobbies away from me, they'll die. Not metaphorically. Actually die. And I can prove it." Victoria felt Marcus approaching from behind, holding an umbrella that did nothing to shield them from the horizontal rain. "Ms. Ashford, we should." "Not now, Marcus." She turned back to Daniel, to this impossible boy with his impossible burden, and asked the question that would change all of their lives. "What do you mean they'll die? Who are you running from?" Daniel looked down at the bobbies in his arms. The one who'd been crying had quieted, and the too still one had begun to move slightly, tiny fists clenching and unclenching. When he looked back up at Victoria, his eyes held something that looked like the moment before a confession, the second before a leap from a great height. "My father," he said simply. "Marcus Trent Morrison, you've probably heard of him." Victoria's breath caught. Marcus Trent Morrison, CEO of Morrison Pharmaceuticals, Forbes 500, philanthropist, one of the most respected businessmen in America, the man who donated millions to children's hospitals, the man who'd been on the cover of Time magazine last month with the headline, "The Humanitarian CEO." "That's impossible," Victoria heard herself say. "Your father is." "A monster," Daniel finished. "And these bobbies." He looked down at the tiny bundles, and Victoria saw a tear slide down his gaunt cheek, mixing with the rain. "They're not just my brother and sister. They're the evidence that will destroy him. They're the reason my mother is dead. And they're the reason he won't stop hunting us until we're all gone." The sky chose that moment to split with lightning, illuminating the street in harsh white light. In that flash, Victoria saw something on one of the baby's wrists, what looked like a hospital band but modified, with some kind of barcode she didn't recognize. "If I tell you everything," Daniel said, his voice breaking, "if I show you the truth, will you help us? Or will you do what everyone else does and choose to believe the lie? Because I have to know right now, before I trust you with what I'm about to reveal. I have to know if you're someone who cares about the truth more than you care about protecting powerful men." Victoria opened her mouth to answer, but no words came. Because the truth was, she didn't know. She'd spent 15 years building walls around her heart, telling herself that caring too much was the fastest way to destruction. And now this boy, this impossible situation, was asking her to tear those walls down in the middle of a thunderstorm on a Manhattan street. Behind them, a black SUV turned onto the street, moving slowly, deliberately. Daniel saw it and went rigid. "They found us," he whispered, his voice pure terror. "Ms. Ashford, Victoria, whatever you decide, you have about 30 seconds before that SUV reaches us. 30 seconds to choose. Drive away and forget you ever saw us, or help us run. But if you choose to help, you need to understand something first." The SUV was getting closer, its tinted windows reflecting nothing but darkness. "If you help us," Daniel continued, his words coming faster now, "your life will never be the same. Everything you think you know about Marcus Morrison, about his company, about what happens to children in his facilities, it's all a lie." And once you know the truth, once you see what these bobbies represent. He looked down at them, then back at Victoria with eyes that held apocalypse. There's no going back. There's no unseeing it, and they'll come after you too. The SUV was 15 seconds away. Victoria looked at this boy, at these bobbies, at the choice that was somehow both impossible and inevitable. And for the first time in 15 years, since the day her own daughter had been taken from her in an accident that maybe wasn't an accident at all, she felt something crack open inside her chest. "Marcus," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos, "open the back door. Daniel, get in now." But as Daniel struggled to stand, clutching the bobbies to his chest, the two still infants suddenly went completely limp. Its tiny head lolled back, and in the streetlight, Victoria saw its skin had taken on a bluish tinge. "No, no, no," Daniel was whispering, trying to shield both bobbies while standing. "Please, not now, please." The SUV was 5 seconds away. And that's when Victoria saw what Daniel had been hiding under the denim wrapping. Connected to the blue-tinged baby's chest was a small device, no bigger than a phone, with a digital display that was flashing red. Numbers counting down. And at that moment, with the SUV pulling alongside them and Daniel's face contorted in terror, Victoria understood with horrible clarity what she was looking at. It wasn't a medical device to keep the baby alive. It was something far worse. The SUV's door opened, and Victoria's world crystallized into a single moment of terrible clarity. A man stepped out, tall, silver-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Daniel had seen in his entire life. But it was his smile that made Victoria's skin crawl. It was the smile of someone who'd already won, who knew all the moves before they were made. "Daniel," the man said, his voice smooth as poisoned honey, "you've led us on quite a chase. Your father is very worried about you." Victoria stepped between them and the boy, a move that surprised even herself. "I don't know who you are, but these children need medical attention. I'm taking them to the hospital." The man's smile widened, and Victoria saw something flicker in his eyes, amusement mixed with calculation. "Ms. Ashford, Victoria Ashford, CEO of Ashford Industries. I recognize you from the Forbes Summit last year. I'm Dr. Richard Caldwell, head of pediatric research at Morrison Pharmaceuticals." He extended his hand as if they were at a cocktail party, not standing in a thunderstorm fighting over 3 children. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. Daniel is unwell. He's experiencing a psychotic episode and has taken his infant siblings without permission. We're here to bring them home safely." Victoria didn't take his hand. Instead, she looked back at Daniel, who had gone deathly pale. The device on the baby's chest was still flashing red, the numbers now reading 0447, 0446, 0445. "Is that true, Daniel?" Victoria asked, though she already knew the answer. She'd spent 20 years in business learning to read people, and this doctor was lying. She could see it in the way his eyes didn't quite match his smile, in the tension of his shoulders beneath that expensive suit. "He's going to kill them," Daniel said, his voice breaking. "Please, Ms. Ashford, look at the device. Look at what they've done." Dr. Caldwell's smile finally cracked. "Daniel, you're confused. That's a monitoring device, something to help with their condition." "It's a kill switch," Daniel's shout echoed off the buildings, raw and desperate. Tell her what Protocol 7 means. Tell her what happens when that timer hits 0. Drop a comment right now if you think Victoria should trust Daniel or the doctor. Because what happens in the next 60 seconds will make you question everything you thought you knew about this situation. The numbers kept counting: 0423, 0422, 0421. Victoria made her decision in the space between heartbeats. "Marcus, the car, now." But before they could move, 3 more men emerged from the SUV, moving with a synchronization that spoke of military training. They spread out, blocking any escape route. their hands hovering near their jackets in a way that made Victoria's blood run cold. "Ms. Ashford," Dr. Caldwell said, and all pretense of friendliness had evaporated from his voice, "I admire your humanitarian instinct, but you're involving yourself in a family matter that you don't understand. These children are part of a crucial medical study. The device Daniel is so frightened of is monitoring their heart rates. If it's removed improperly, they could die. We need to take them back to our facility immediately." "Then why does it have a countdown?" Victoria demanded. "Why are those numbers getting smaller?" Dr. Caldwell's pause was half a second too long. "It's a battery indicator." "You're lying." Victoria surprised herself with the venom in her voice. She turned to Daniel. Show me what's under that device." Daniel's hands were shaking as he carefully peeled back the blanket from the blue-tinged baby's chest. Victoria stepped closer, and what she saw made her stomach turn. The device was attached to the infant's skin with what looked like surgical adhesive, but beneath it she could see tiny puncture marks, perfectly circular, arranged in a pattern. And around those marks the baby's skin was discolored, not from illness but from something else, something chemical. The timer read 03:47 now, and as it ticked to 03:46, Victoria saw the baby's tiny body twitch involuntarily. "What is that doing to this child?" Victoria's voice was ice. "Ms. Ashford, step away from them. This is your final warning." Dr. Caldwell nodded to his men, who began advancing. That's when Marcus did something Victoria had never seen in 12 years of employment. Her driver, her gentle Marcus who'd never raised his voice, moved faster than seemed possible for a man his age. He positioned himself between Victoria and the approaching men, and his jacket fell open just enough for Victoria to see he was armed. "Dr. Caldwell," Marcus said quietly, "I suggest your men stop moving, now." The street froze in a tableau of tension. Rain continued to pour, the device continued its countdown: 03:15, 03:14, 03:13, and somewhere in the distance sirens began to wail. "You're making a mistake," Dr. Caldwell said, but now his voice carried uncertainty. "Marcus Morrison is one of the most powerful men in this country. If you interfere with his family business, he will destroy you. Your company, your reputation, your life, everything you've built will crumble." Victoria felt something shift inside her then, something that had been dormant for 15 years. Because she suddenly remembered her own daughter, her Sophie, who died at age 7 in a car accident that had always felt wrong. The official investigation had found nothing suspicious, but Victoria had never stopped questioning. And now, looking at these bobbies with their mysterious devices, at Daniel's bruised neck, at this doctor's practiced lies, she wondered if she'd been asking the wrong questions all these years. Have you ever had a moment where you knew your life was about to change forever? A moment where you had to choose between safety and doing what's right? Share your story in the comments, because Victoria is about to make a choice that will put everything she's ever known at risk. "How much time?" Victoria asked Daniel, ignoring the doctor completely. 2 minutes, maybe less. When it hits 0, Daniel's voice broke. "I've seen it happen to the others. Their bodies just shut down. The device releases something directly into their bloodstream. It looks like sudden infant death syndrome, completely untraceable. That's why he uses bobbies. That's why my mother tried to run." "Enough of this insanity," Dr. Caldwell snapped. "You're listening to the delusions of a disturbed child." "Then let me take them to a hospital," Victoria challenged. "A public hospital, not your facility. Let independent doctors examine them. If Daniel's lying, if this is just a monitoring device, then you have nothing to hide." The look that crossed Dr. Caldwell's face told Victoria everything she needed to know. It was the look of a man whose bluff had been called, who'd run out of reasonable-sounding lies. The timer hit 02:00. "We can remove it," Daniel said desperately. "There's a code, a sequence. My mother told me before he couldn't finish. But we need the right equipment, medical supplies, and we need to do it before the timer runs out or before they activate the manual override. Manual override, Victoria repeated. Daniel nodded to Dr. Caldwell. He has a remote, they all do. They can trigger it any time they want. Victoria watched the doctor's hand move almost imperceptibly toward his pocket, and she knew Daniel was telling the truth. Everything he'd said was true. These bobbies were walking evidence of something so monstrous that powerful men were willing to kill them to keep it hidden. 01:30 now. Victoria made a decision that would either save 3 children or destroy everything she'd spent 2 decades building. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in 5 years. "Jonathan, it's Victoria. I need you to meet me at your clinic, now. And I need you to bring everything you have for removing foreign objects from pediatric patients. I'm talking surgical equipment, scanners, the works." She paused. "No, don't ask questions, just do it. You owe me, remember." Dr. Caldwell's face had gone from confident to dangerous. "You're making a fatal mistake." "Maybe," Victoria said, meeting his eyes. "But I've been playing it safe for 15 years, and it hasn't brought me anything but emptiness. Marcus, the car." What happened next occurred in seconds that stretched like hours. Dr. Caldwell's hand dove into his pocket. Marcus moved to intercept. Daniel clutched the bobbies and ran for the Rolls-Royce. And Victoria did something she hadn't done since her daughter died. She prayed. She prayed that Marcus reached the doctor before he pressed whatever button was in his pocket. She prayed that Jonathan would come through. She prayed that the timer could be stopped. And most of all, she prayed that she wasn't about to watch 2 bobbies die in the back of her car while their brother screamed. 01:00. Marcus tackled Dr. Caldwell and something clattered to the wet pavement, a small remote, its red button gleaming in the streetlight. One of the other men lunged for it, but Victoria was faster. She grabbed it and threw it as hard as she could. It shattered against a building wall. "Go!" Marcus shouted, already fighting off 2 of the men. Victoria didn't hesitate. She dove into the back of the Rolls-Royce where Daniel sat with the bobbies, slammed the door, and screamed at her backup driver who'd been waiting. "Drive! Jonathan Reeves' private clinic on East 68th. Run every red light." The car lurched forward, tires screaming on wet asphalt. 00:45. In the back seat, Victoria looked down at the device, at the numbers counting down to something unthinkable. Daniel was crying now, openly sobbing, holding both bobbies as if he could protect them through sheer force of will. "What do we do?" Victoria asked. "Daniel, tell me what to do." The boy looked at her with eyes that had seen too much death for someone so young. "My mother said there's a code, 6 digits. She made me memorize it in case." He swallowed hard. "But Ms. Ashford, you need to know something. Even if we get the code right, even if we stop the device, there are 23 others." 00:30. 23 what? Daniel's answer made Victoria's blood turn to ice. 23 other bobbies, all with the same device, all part of the same experiment. And tomorrow night at exactly midnight, they're all scheduled to die. The car raced through Manhattan, the clinic still 5 minutes away, and the timer now reading 00:15. 14 seconds. Victoria's hands shook as she positioned herself over the device, her phone's flashlight illuminating the tiny LED screen. The blue-tinged baby beneath it, a girl, Victoria now realized, had stopped moving entirely. Her chest barely rose and fell. "The code, Daniel, now." 774. Daniel's voice cracked, his eyes squeezed shut as he tried to remember through his panic. 749, or was it 748? God, I can't remember. My mother only told me once and I was so scared and there was so much blood. 10 seconds. "Daniel, look at me." Victoria grabbed his face with both hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "Your mother trusted you with this. She trusted you to save your brother and sister. You know this code. It's in there. Breathe and tell me." The boy's eyes focused, and Victoria saw him retreat somewhere inside himself, to a memory that must have been agony to revisit. When he spoke again, his voice was different, younger, the voice of the child he'd been before whatever horror had made him grow up too fast. 749213, he whispered. She said it twice. 749213. She said it while she was dying. 6 seconds. Victoria's fingers flew across the tiny keypad on the device. 749213. She pressed enter. Nothing happened. 4 seconds. It's not working. Victoria's voice rose to scream. Daniel, are you sure? Wait, the boy lunged forward, staring at the device. The red button. You have to hold the red button while entering the last digit. 2 seconds. Victoria's world narrowed to the size of a pinhead. Her finger found the red button, pressed it, held it down while her other thumb hit the 3 again. The device emitted a high-pitched beep that seemed impossibly loud in the confined space of the car. 1 second. The timer stopped at 0001. Then the screen flashed green, and the numbers disappeared entirely, replaced by a single word. DACTIVATD. Victoria collapsed back against the leather seat, her entire body shaking. The baby girl gasped, a tiny, desperate sound, and color began returning to her skin. Not much, but enough. Enough to mean she was still alive. "Oh God," Daniel sobbed, clutching both bobbies to his chest. "Oh God, oh God, oh God." But Victoria's mind was already racing ahead, already processing what Daniel had said before. You said there are 23 others, 23 bobbies with these devices. Where? Daniel wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, trying to compose himself. The car screeched around a corner, throwing them all sideways. Through the window, Victoria could see they were getting close to Jonathan's clinic. Morrison Pharmaceuticals has a research facility, Daniel said, his voice hollow. About 40 miles north of the city. It's listed as a pediatric care center for premature infants. On paper, it's a charity project, free care for bobbies whose parents can't afford it. That's what the press releases say. That's what the tours show politicians and donors. But that's not what it really is. No, Daniel looked down at the baby girl, whose breathing had stabilized but was still worryingly shallow. It's a testing facility for Protocol 7. Asterisk, quick question for everyone watching. Do you think big pharmaceutical companies are capable of something like this? Have you ever questioned what happens behind closed doors in these facilities? Let me know in the comments, because the truth Daniel is about to reveal will make you see the medical industry in a completely different light. The Rolls-Royce pulled up to a nondescript brownstone on East 68th Street. Before Victoria could even open the door, a man burst out of the building, Jonathan Reeves, looking exactly as she remembered from 5 years ago when she'd funded his free clinic after a scandal had nearly destroyed his career. Tall, thin, with kind eyes that had seen too much suffering. "Victoria, what in God's name?" He stopped when he saw Daniel and the bobbies. His doctor's instincts kicked in immediately. "Inside. Now, how long have they been in distress?" "The girl, maybe 10 minutes. The boy seems stable." Victoria climbed out, helping Daniel, who could barely stand. "Jonathan, they have devices attached to them, medical devices that were designed to kill them. We need to remove them, and we need to do it fast." Jonathan's face went through several expressions: disbelief, horror, and finally grim determination. "Bring them to the surgical suite. I'll need to see what we're dealing with." 20 minutes later, Victoria stood in a sterile room watching Jonathan examine both bobbies under bright lights. He'd given them both IV fluids and oxygen, and color had fully returned to the girl's skin. Daniel sat in a chair nearby, eating his first real meal in days, soup that Jonathan's nurse had heated up, while trying not to fall asleep. "This is..." Jonathan's voice trailed off as he studied the device on the baby girl's chest through a magnifying glass. "Victoria, this is military-grade biotech. See these contact points? They're not just monitoring vital signs. They're connected directly to the autonomic nervous system. One signal from this device could stop a heart, collapse lungs, cause a stroke, all while leaving minimal forensic evidence. Can you remove them? Yes, but carefully. There are microscopic barbs holding them in place. If I pull wrong, they'll tear muscle tissue. I'll need to dissolve the adhesive first, then extract each barb individually. He looked up at Victoria and she saw fear in his eyes. Who did this? Who would create something like this? Victoria glanced at Daniel, who had stopped eating and was watching them both. The boy's eyes held a question. How much should he tell? Tell him, Victoria said softly. Tell him everything. So Daniel did, and with every word, Jonathan's face grew paler. It had started 18 months ago, Daniel explained. His father, Marcus Morrison, had won a massive government contract, a billion-dollar deal to develop next-generation biomedical monitoring systems for military use. But the contract came with impossible demands. The devices needed to be tested on human subjects, and they needed results within 2 years. He couldn't use adults, Daniel said, his voice mechanical, like he was reciting a nightmare he'd memorized. Adults have legal protections, medical histories, people who'd notice if they disappeared. But bobbies, especially bobbies from poor families, from addicts, from illegal immigrants who'd never go to the police. He paused. Nobody notices when those bobbies disappear. Victoria felt sick. Your mother knew about this. She found out 6 months ago. She was visiting the facility for a charity event. She was supposed to be the face of Morrison Pharmaceuticals' humanitarian work, but she went into the wrong room. She saw the real ward where they keep the test subjects. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. 23 bobbies, all under 6 months old, all with devices, all being slowly killed and revived over and over to test the limits of the technology. Dear God, Jonathan whispered. She tried to go to the police, but my father has connections everywhere. The police commissioner, the mayor, half the judges in the state, they all owe him favors, so she decided to run. She took the twins, they were the newest subjects, only 2 weeks old, and she tried to escape. Daniel's voice broke. But they caught us on the highway. They ran us off the road. The car flipped. My mother was pinned. She was bleeding so much, and she knew she wasn't going to make it. So she told me the deactivation code and made me promise I'd save them. Made me promise I'd tell the truth. How did she die? Victoria asked, though she already knew the answer. They said it was internal injuries from the crash. Daniel looked up and his eyes were empty. But I saw Dr. Caldwell standing over her. I saw him press something against her neck, and then she just stopped breathing, even though she'd been talking to me just seconds before. The room fell silent, except for the soft beeping of the monitors attached to the bobbies. If you're watching this and you're as angry as I am right now, smash that like button and share this video with everyone you know, because this story needs to be heard. What Marcus Morrison is doing can't stay hidden. Jonathan straightened up from his examination, his jaw set. It's going to take me about 2 hours to safely remove both devices. But Victoria, even after we do that, these bobbies are going to need intensive care. The one girl especially, she's showing signs of neurological damage. And Daniel, he looked at the boy with professional concern. When's the last time you slept, ate a full meal? You're severely malnourished. I'm fine, Daniel said automatically. You're not fine. You're shutting down. Your body is running on adrenaline and sheer will, and both are about to run out. Jonathan turned to Victoria. What's the plan here? Because removing these devices is just the beginning. You're talking about exposing one of the most powerful men in America. You're talking about accusing him of murdering his own wife and experimenting on infants. Do you have any idea what that's going to take? Victoria did know. She'd spent 20 years in the business world, fighting hostile takeovers and corporate espionage. She knew exactly how powerful men protected themselves. They had lawyers and PR firms and connections that ran deeper than most people could imagine. They controlled narratives and destroyed accusers and made evidence disappear. But she also knew something else. She knew what it felt like to lose a child and spend every day after wondering if you could have done something to save them. And she wasn't going to let Marcus Morrison kill 23 more Bobbies just because he was powerful. "We need evidence," Victoria said. "Real evidence, not just Daniel's testimony. We need to get inside that facility, document everything, and get those Bobbies out." "That's impossible," Daniel said flatly. "The facility has security like a prison, cameras everywhere, armed guards, biometric locks. And even if we somehow got in, my father would know. He has people watching. That's how they found us tonight, facial recognition cameras throughout the city. By now, he knows I'm with you. He probably knows we're here." As if summoning a demon by speaking its name, Jonathan's nurse rushed into the room, her face pale. "Dr. Reeves, there's a problem. Someone just pulled up outside in 3 black SUVs. They're not getting out, just sitting there, waiting." Victoria moved to the window and carefully pulled back the curtain. 3 SUVs, just as the nurse had said. And standing beside one of them, illuminated by a streetlight, was a man she recognized from 100 magazine covers and news interviews. Marcus Trent Morrison himself had come for his children. He looked up at the window, and even from this distance, Victoria could see him smile. He raised his phone to his ear, and a second later, Victoria's phone rang. She answered. "Ms. Ashford," came that famous voice, warm and reasonable and utterly terrifying in its calmness. "I believe you have something that belongs to me. I'm willing to make this very simple. Bring me my children, walk away, and we'll forget this unfortunate misunderstanding ever happened. I'll even make a generous donation to your company's charity foundation. $5 million, 10, if you'd like. And if I refuse?" The warmth vanished from his voice like a switch being flipped. "Then I make a phone call, and before sunrise, evidence will surface that you've been embezzling from your own company for years. Another call, and your board will vote you out. Another, and criminal charges will be filed. By this time tomorrow, Victoria Ashford won't exist as anything but a cautionary tale about fallen executives." Victoria looked at Daniel, at the Bobbies he'd fought so hard to save, at Jonathan, who'd already put his career on the line just by helping. She thought about her daughter Sophie, about the questions she'd never gotten answers to, about the kind of person she'd become in the 15 years since. Cold, calculating, safe. She was so tired of being safe. "Mr. Morrison," she said into the phone, "I have a counteroffer. You have until sunrise to turn yourself in to the FBI. If you don't, I'm going to destroy you. Not with your lawyers or your connections or your money. I'm going to use something you can't buy or intimidate, the truth." There was a long pause. Then Morrison laughed, a sound without any humor in it. "You know what the truth is, Ms. Ashford. The truth is whatever people believe. And people believe me. I'm the man who saved thousands of children through charitable medical care. You're just a bitter woman who never got over her daughter's death, who's going to believe your truth over mine." He hung up. Victoria turned back to the room, where everyone was staring at her like she just declared war on a nuclear power. Which, in a way, she had. "Jonathan, how fast can you remove those devices?" "If I rush, 90 minutes for both, but it's risky." "Do it, we have until sunrise." Victoria pulled out her phone and started dialing. "Daniel, I need you to write down everything you remember about that facility. Layouts, security systems, schedules, everything. Every detail, no matter how small." "What are you going to do?" Daniel asked. Victoria smiled, and it was the first time in 15 years that the smile reached her eyes. "I'm going to do what I should have done a long time ago. I'm going to stop playing their game and start playing mine." She finished dialing and waited for the answer. When it came, she spoke 4 words that would change everything. "James, I need you." Outside, Morrison's SUVs continued to wait. Inside, a clock ticked toward sunrise. And in a facility 40 miles away, 23 Bobbies slept, unaware that they had less than 24 hours to live unless someone could stop a monster wearing a humanitarian's mask. The device on the baby girl's chest that Jonathan was beginning to remove hummed one last time before he carefully extracted it. As he held it up to the light, Victoria saw something she hadn't noticed before, a tiny serial number etched into its surface. And beneath that, in letters so small they were almost invisible, property of U.S. Department of Defense. This wasn't just about one man's crimes, this went higher, much higher. And they had until midnight tomorrow to prove it. Next is going to blow your mind. We're going inside that facility, and what Victoria discovers there will reveal a conspiracy so massive, it goes all the way to the highest levels of government. Hit subscribe now, because you do not want to miss what happens next. James Hawthorne arrived 40 minutes later, slipping through Morrison's surveillance perimeter like smoke through a fence. Victoria watched from the window as he materialized out of the shadows between buildings. No car, no fanfare, just suddenly there. Even after all these years, he still moved like the CIA operative he'd once been, before the Syria incident had ended his career and their engagement in the same bloody week. "You look terrible," were his first words when he entered the clinic, though his eyes held something warmer than his voice suggested. "You look exactly the same," Victoria replied, and it was true. 5 years hadn't touched him. Same sharp jaw, same silver-flecked dark hair, same eyes that could calculate a dozen exit strategies while carrying on a casual conversation. "You called, I came. Now tell me why Marcus Morrison, one of the most powerful men in America, has 3 SUVs parked outside with enough firepower to start a small war." James glanced at Daniel, at the bobbies on the examination table, at Jonathan, who was carefully extracting the second device. "And tell me fast, because Morrison just made 4 phone calls, and I'm guessing they weren't to his lawyers." Victoria told him everything. With each detail, James's expression grew darker. "Show me the device," he said when she finished. Jonathan held up the first device he'd removed, now safely deactivated in a steel tray. James examined it with the careful attention of someone who'd seen similar technology before, and when he looked up, his face was grim. "This is DARPA tech, cutting edge, not supposed to exist outside of Level 5 classified programs." He turned it over, revealing the Department of Defense marking Victoria had spotted. Someone gave Morrison access to military research that's so secret most generals don't even know it exists. "Can you trace it?" Victoria asked. "Maybe, but that's not your immediate problem." James moved to the window, his trained eye analyzing Morrison's position. "Your immediate problem is that in about 30 minutes, Morrison's going to get tired of waiting. He'll claim you've kidnapped his children, get a judge to issue an emergency custody order, which he can do at 3 in the morning because he owns half the judges in this city, and then he'll come in here with police backup. Legal, clean, and impossible to fight." "So we move first," Victoria said. "Move where?" "He has eyes everywhere, Victoria. Traffic cameras, street cameras, facial recognition algorithms scanning every feed in the city. The second you step outside with those bobbies, he'll know where you're going." James paused, studying her face. "Unless you're not planning to run, you're planning something else." Victoria pulled out her phone and opened a folder she'd been compiling during the 40 minutes while Jonathan worked. Photos of Morrison Pharmaceuticals' facility pulled from satellite imagery. Blueprints she'd purchased from a corrupt city planning official 20 minutes ago for $50,000 in cryptocurrency. Guard schedules from a security company employee she tracked down through LinkedIn and bribed with twice his annual salary. When you had money and knew how to spend it fast, you could build an invasion plan before sunrise. "We're going to the facility," Victoria said. "Tonight. We're going to get those 23 bobbies out, document everything, and make so much noise that Morrison can't cover it up even with all his connections." Drop a comment right now. Do you think they can actually pull this off? Can 3 people really take down a facility guarded like a fortress? Because what happens next is either going to be the most heroic thing you've ever seen, or it's going to be a disaster. James stared at her like she'd suggested they swim to the moon. Victoria, that's insane. It's a secure facility with trained guards. Even if we somehow got inside, Morrison would have us arrested before we got 10 feet from the building. He'd claim we were terrorists, kidnappers, industrial spies, whatever narrative he needed. Not if we bring witnesses. Victoria pulled up another screen on her phone. I've already contacted Elizabeth Park at the New York Times. She owes me. I gave her the story that won her a Pulitzer 3 years ago. She's getting her camera crew together now. I've also called Senator Helen Rodriguez. She's been trying to investigate Morrison Pharmaceuticals for months but hasn't had enough evidence. And I've contacted the FBI's field office, specifically Agent Marcus Chen, who's been building a case against Morrison's company for off-label drug testing. You did all that in 40 minutes, James asked, something like admiration creeping into his voice. I had motivation. Victoria looked at Daniel, who was watching the baby girl breathe steadily for the first time since the device had been removed. And I'm not going to let another child die because I was too scared to act. Jonathan finished removing the second device and carefully placed it in a sealed container. Both Bobbies are stable, but Victoria, they need hospital care. Proper hospital care with pediatric specialists. And Daniel needs rest, food, and probably psychological counseling for whatever trauma he's endured. We'll get them all of that, Victoria promised. But first, we end this. James, I need you to tell me honestly, can we get inside that facility? James was quiet for a long moment, his mind clearly running through scenarios. Finally, he nodded slowly. Maybe. If we're smart, lucky, and willing to break about 40 federal laws. The facility has physical security, but their cybersecurity is probably their weak point. These private medical facilities always are. They spend money on cameras and guards but run their computer systems on outdated software. Can you hack it? Given time, yes, but we don't have time. James pulled out his own phone, fingers flying across the screen. However, I know someone who can. Someone who owes me considerably more than a favor. Someone who happens to be one of the best hackers in the Eastern Hemisphere. How fast? If I call her now, she could have their security system compromised in 20 minutes. Cameras on loop, electronic locks overridden, alarm systems disabled. We'd have a 30-minute window before their system administrator noticed the intrusion. Maybe less. Victoria looked at the clock. 3:47 a.m. The facility was 40 miles away, which meant 45 minutes of driving if they pushed it. Add 20 minutes for the hack, 30 minutes inside to document and extract the Bobbies. They could be done by 5:45 a.m., just before sunrise, just before Morrison's deadline. Do it, Victoria said. Make the call. James hesitated, something unusual flickering across his face. Victoria, if we do this, there's no going back. Morrison isn't going to forgive or forget. He's going to come after you with everything he has. Your company, your reputation, possibly your freedom. Are you absolutely certain? Victoria thought about her daughter Sophie, about the official accident report that had never made sense. She thought about Daniel's bruised neck and his mother's last words. She thought about 23 Bobbies sleeping in cribs, unaware they had timers counting down to their deaths. Make the call, she repeated. While James dialed, Victoria turned to Daniel. I need you to stay here with Jonathan. Keep the Bobbies safe. If something goes wrong. I'm coming with you, Daniel interrupted, struggling to his feet. Absolutely not. You're 15 years old. I'm 16, and I'm the only one who knows the facility's layout from the inside. The blueprints won't show you where they actually keep the Bobbies. They won't show you which guards are willing to look the other way for extra cash and which ones are true believers in my father's work. They won't show you where my mother hid her evidence before she died. Daniel's voice was steel. You need me, And those are my brother and sister you're trying to save. I'm coming." Victoria started to argue, but James cut her off. "He's right. We need someone who knows the terrain. And Victoria," he gave her a pointed look, "you were 17 when you started your first company. You were 18 when you took on the Westfield Corporation in that hostile takeover. Don't pretend age determines courage." Victoria felt something crack in her chest, some protective instinct warring with pragmatism. Finally, she nodded. "But you follow my orders, no matter what, understood?" "Understood," Daniel said, though his eyes held the same stubborn fire she'd seen in her own mirror 20 years ago. Jonathan grabbed Victoria's arm. "This is madness. You're going to get yourselves killed. Or worse, arrested, and then Morrison walks free because the case is contaminated by illegal evidence." "That's why we need the witnesses there," Victoria said. "The reporter, the senator, the FBI agent. If they see what we see, if they document it independently, it's not contaminated. It's journalism, political oversight, and legitimate federal investigation. And if Morrison has them in his pocket too." "Then we'll have tried," Victoria said softly, "and sometimes trying is all you can do." James hung up his phone. "Okay, we're in business. My contact can crack their system by 4:15 a.m. She'll give us a 30-minute window starting at 4:45 a.m. After that, all bets are off." He paused. "Also, she wants $200,000 wired to a Cayman Islands account." "Done." Victoria was already pulling up her banking app. "What about Morrison's men outside?" "Leave them to me. I've got a distraction plan that should buy us 10 minutes, enough time to get clear and meet up with your witnesses." James smiled, and it was the dangerous smile Victoria remembered from their operational planning sessions years ago. "Though I have to warn you, the distraction is going to cost about $300,000 in property damage." "I don't care if it costs $1 million, just get us out." Asterisk quick question while they prepare. Have you ever had to risk everything for what's right? Have you ever stood up against someone powerful, even though it could cost you? Share your story in the comments. I bet you're braver than you think. 15 minutes later, they were ready. Daniel had drawn detailed maps of the facility from memory, marking guard rotations and security blind spots. Victoria had transferred the money to James's hacker contact and confirmed that the witnesses were mobilizing. Jonathan had prepared medical supplies in case the bobbies at the facility needed emergency care during extraction. The only thing left was getting past Morrison's blockade. "How are we getting out?" Victoria asked as they gathered by the rear exit. James held up a small device that looked like a car key fob. "In about 30 seconds, a gas main is going to rupture 3 blocks south of here. Not enough to hurt anyone, but enough to trigger a mandatory evacuation of a 6-block radius. Morrison's men will have to respond, and in the confusion, we slip away in a vehicle they're not looking for." "What vehicle?" James pointed to the alley behind the clinic, where a battered ambulance sat idling. "Borrowed from a friend who runs a private medical transport company. It'll get us past any checkpoints. Who stops an ambulance during a gas leak evacuation?" Victoria had to admit it was brilliant. "And the reporter, the senator, the FBI. Meeting us at a staging point 2 miles from the facility. From there, we go in together." James checked his watch. 30 seconds. They waited in tense silence. Daniel held his brother and sister, still unnamed, Victoria realized, with a gentleness that broke her heart. Jonathan stood by the door, looking like he was trying to memorize all their faces in case he never saw them again. "James," Victoria said quietly, "thank you. I know you didn't have to." "Yes, I did," he interrupted. 5 years ago, you told me I'd become someone who only cared about rules and protocols, someone who'd forgotten why we made those rules in the first place. You said I'd stopped seeing people and started seeing chess pieces." He looked at her, and Victoria saw old pain in his eyes. "You were right. And then Syria happened, and I learned what happens when people become chess pieces. So yes, I did have to come. Because this is the kind of thing the man I used to be would have done without hesitation. Before Victoria could respond, the building shook, not violently but enough to rattle windows. In the distance, alarms began to wail. "That's our cue," James said. "Everyone in the ambulance, now." They moved fast. Victoria clutched the sealed containers holding the removed devices, evidence that could bring down Morrison if they survived long enough to present it. Daniel carried the bobbies, Jonathan brought the medical supplies, and James drove like a man who'd escaped hostile territory more times than he could count. As they pulled out of the alley, Victoria caught a glimpse of Morrison's men abandoning their posts, responding to the evacuation order just as James had predicted. And standing in the street, watching the ambulance pass, was Marcus Morrison himself. Their eyes met through the window for just a second. He didn't look angry or panicked. He looked amused, like someone watching pieces move on a chessboard according to his grand design. That look terrified Victoria more than anything else that night. "He knows where we're going," she said. "Of course he does," James replied, eyes on the road as he wove through emergency vehicles responding to the gas leak. "He's probably calling the facility right now, warning them we're coming, which means we've lost our element of surprise. So what do we do?" James smiled that dangerous smile again. "We stop trying to be subtle. If Morrison wants a war, we give him one. Straight through the front door, cameras rolling, witnesses watching. We make so much noise that every news organization in the country knows what's happening before he can spin the narrative." Daniel leaned forward from the back. "There's something you should know about the facility, about why my father is really running these experiments." Victoria turned to look at him. "What do you mean?" "The devices aren't just weapons. They're not just about military applications." Daniel's voice was hollow. "They're about control. My father has been working with a group. I don't know who they are, but they're powerful, connected. They want to develop technology that can be implanted in people without their knowledge. Technology that can monitor them, influence them, even kill them remotely if they become problematic." "That's impossible," Jonathan breathed. "The technology doesn't exist." "It does now," Daniel said. "Those bobbies are proof, and there are more test subjects. Not just bobbies, adults too. People who disappeared from hospitals, from psychiatric facilities, from prisons. People no one would miss. My mother found files with hundreds of names." Victoria felt ice spreading through her veins. "Where are these files?" "Hidden in the facility, in my mother's old office. She knew she might die, so she left everything there, encoded in a way only someone looking for it would find." Daniel met Victoria's eyes. "That's the real evidence you need. Not just the bobbies, not just the devices. The files that show this goes beyond Morrison, beyond one company. The files that show there's a whole program, funded by people who want to turn human beings into controllable assets." The ambulance raced through the pre-dawn darkness, carrying 3 people who decided to fight a monster and 2 bobbies who represented evidence of crimes beyond imagination. Behind them, Manhattan disappeared in the rearview mirror. Ahead, a facility waited where 23 children slept, unaware that midnight was coming. And somewhere, in offices and conference rooms hidden from public view, powerful people were making phone calls, moving pieces on a chessboard, preparing to crush anyone who threatened to expose what they'd built. Victoria checked her phone. 4:23 a.m. 22 minutes until the security system went down. 22 minutes to prepare for a fight that would either save innocent lives or destroy everyone involved. She looked at the evidence containers in her lap, at Daniel holding his siblings, at James driving with the focus of someone who'd done impossible things before and survived. "We're going to win," she said, and was surprised to find she believed it. "Maybe," James replied, "or maybe we're about to discover that some monsters are too big to kill." The facility appeared on the horizon, a modern building surrounded by perfect lawns and tasteful landscaping. To anyone passing by, it looked like exactly what Morrison claimed, a charitable medical center helping vulnerable children. But Victoria knew better now. She knew what hid behind those walls, and in less than 20 minutes the whole world would know too. The facility looked serene in the pre-dawn darkness, its glass and steel facade reflecting the first hints of purple on the horizon. Victorian-style landscaping surrounded the building, carefully manicured hedges, a fountain with cherubs, benches placed at artistic intervals. Everything designed to project an image of peace, healing, compassion. Victoria wanted to burn it all down. They'd parked the ambulance half a mile away, meeting their witnesses in a rest-stop parking lot that felt surreally normal. Elizabeth Park, the New York Times journalist, had arrived with a cameraman and a younger reporter whose eyes went wide when Daniel explained what they were about to see. Senator Helen Rodriguez showed up in an unmarked sedan, her silver hair pulled back severely, her face set with the determination of someone who'd been waiting for this moment. And FBI agent Marcus Chen came armed not just with a weapon, but with two more agents and a warrant he'd somehow convinced a judge to sign at 4 a.m. "Let me be clear," Chen said, his voice carrying the authority of federal law. "If what you're telling me is accurate, this is the largest bioethics violation in U.S. history. But if you're wrong, if this is some kind of vendetta or misunderstanding, I will personally ensure that all of you face federal charges. Am I understood?" "You're understood," Victoria said. "But you won't need to charge us, because what's inside that building is going to make you wish you'd brought more agents." James's phone buzzed at exactly 4:45 a.m. A text message, just one word, "Done." "Security system is compromised," James announced. "Cameras are on a 30-minute loop showing empty hallways. Electronic locks are disabled. Alarms won't trigger. We have until 5:15 a.m. before their system administrator notices something's wrong." "Then we move now," Senator Rodriguez said. "Elizabeth, I want you filming everything. Everything. This needs to be documented in a way that can't be disputed or buried." They approached the facility in two groups. James led the first team, Victoria, Daniel, and Agent Chen, through a service entrance Daniel had identified. The second team, Senator Rodriguez, Elizabeth and her crew, and the other two FBI agents, would enter through the main lobby 2 minutes later, providing a distraction if needed. The service door clicked open when James waved a cloned security badge near the sensor. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed in sterile corridors that smelled of antiseptic and something else, something chemical that made Victoria's eyes water. "The pediatric ward is on the 3rd floor," Daniel whispered, his voice tight. "But my mother's office is on the 2nd. We should get the files first. If something goes wrong—" "Nothing's going to go wrong," Victoria said, though she didn't believe it. Everything about this felt wrong. The empty corridors, the silence, the way the building seemed to be holding its breath. They found the stairs and climbed quickly. Agent Chen moved with his weapon drawn, trained eyes scanning every corner. James had produced a gun from somewhere. Victoria didn't ask where, and moved with the fluid efficiency of someone who'd done this in places far more dangerous than a New York medical facility. The 2nd floor was darker than the first, lit only by emergency lighting. Daniel led them down a corridor lined with offices, each door labeled with a name and title. They passed Dr. Richard Caldwell, Chief of Research, and Dr. Sarah Kim, Pediatric Specialist, before stopping at a door that read Dr. Jennifer Morrison, Director of Charitable Programs. Daniel's mother, the woman who died trying to save her children. "Daniel," Victoria said softly, "are you?" "I'm fine," but his hands shook as he reached for the door handle. "She used to let me play in here when I was little, before everything changed, before I understood what my father really was." The office was exactly what you'd expect from a humanitarian director. Inspirational posters on the walls, photos of smiling children, awards for charitable work. A desk with a computer, filing cabinets, a bookshelf filled with medical texts and parenting guides. "Where are the files?" Agent Chen asked. Daniel moved to the bookshelf and pulled out a worn copy of Where the Wild Things Are. He opened it carefully, and Victoria saw it wasn't a book at all. The pages had been hollowed out, creating a space just large enough for a USB drive. "She said if anything happened to her, the truth would be in the wild things," Daniel said, his voice cracking. "I used to think she meant the book, but now I think she meant us. The children were the wild things they tried to control." Victoria took the USB drive with hands that trembled. This small piece of plastic could bring down an empire, or it could get them all killed. "We need to move," James said urgently. "I'm picking up movement on the lower floors. Security might have noticed something." They climbed to the third floor, and that's where the facade finally crumbled. The pediatric ward was nothing like the cheerful treatment rooms shown in Morrison Pharmaceuticals' promotional videos. It was a laboratory disguised as a nursery. 23 cribs lined 2 walls, each containing an infant, and every single baby had the same device Victoria had seen on Daniel's siblings: sleek, black, pulsing with a soft red light. Above each crib, a monitor displayed vital signs and something else, a countdown. Every baby had a different number, but Victoria's blood ran cold when she saw the pattern. They were all counting down to the same moment: 23, 47, 16, 23, 47, 15, 23, 47, 14. Midnight tonight, just as Daniel had said. In less than 24 hours, all these children would die simultaneously. "I need you to pause and really think about this for a second. 23 Bobbies, all scheduled to die at the same time, all being used as test subjects for technology that could control human beings. Is this the world we want to live in?" Drop a comment with your thoughts, because what happens next is going to determine whether these children live or die. Elizabeth Park's camera captured everything: the cribs, the devices, the monitors. Senator Rodriguez stood frozen, her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Agent Chen was already on his phone, calling for backup, for ambulances, for every federal resource he could mobilize. "We need to document the devices before we remove them," James said. "Photos, serial numbers, anything that can." The lights went out. For 3 seconds, the room was pitch black except for the red glow of 23 devices. Then emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in hellish crimson. "That's not a power failure," James said. "Someone cut the mains deliberately. We've been." The door at the far end of the ward opened, and Marcus Morrison walked in. He wasn't alone. Dr. Caldwell flanked his right side, and 6 security guards spread out behind them. But it was Morrison himself who commanded the room's attention. He looked exactly like his photos, distinguished, silver-haired, with the kind of face that inspired trust, except his eyes. His eyes were empty of anything human. "Ms. Ashford," he said pleasantly, as if they'd run into each other at a cocktail party, "I have to admire your tenacity. Most people would have taken my offer and walked away, but not you. You had to play hero." His gaze shifted to Daniel, and something flickered in those dead eyes. "Hello, son." "Don't call me that," Daniel said, his voice shaking with rage. "You killed my mother. You tried to kill my brother and sister. You're not my father. You're a monster." Morrison smiled. "Your mother was weak. She let sentimentality blind her to the bigger picture. These children," he gestured at the cribs, "are part of something revolutionary, something that will change the course of human history. In 10 years, the technology we're developing here will allow governments to monitor and control criminal populations, terrorists, enemy combatants. We'll eliminate crime, prevent wars, save millions of lives." "By killing Bobbies," Senator Rodriguez's voice cut through the room like a blade. "By experimenting on the most vulnerable members of our society. By making necessary sacrifices for the greater good," Morrison replied. Something politicians like you claim to understand but never have the courage to actually do. You want peace and safety, but you're not willing to pay the price for it. Agent Chen stepped forward, his weapon trained on Morrison. Marcus Morrison, you're under arrest for murder, child endangerment, illegal human experimentation. Morrison laughed. Tell me, Agent Chen, who signed the warrant for my arrest, Judge Patricia Hoffman, the same judge who's been on my company's payroll for 6 years. Or perhaps you think the evidence on that USB drive will save you. He looked at Victoria. I know about the drive. I've known since Jennifer hid it 3 months ago. I let her keep it because it's useless. Every file is encrypted with a key that only exists in my head. Without that key, all you have is meaningless data. Victoria felt her heart sink. They'd risked everything, and Morrison had been 3 steps ahead the entire time. But I'm a reasonable man, Morrison continued. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to give me my children, all of them. You're going to hand over that USB drive and any other evidence you think you've collected. Elizabeth, your camera too. And then you're all going to leave and forget this night ever happened. And if we refuse? Victoria asked. Morrison nodded to Dr. Caldwell, who pulled out a tablet. Then I press this button and all 23 devices activate simultaneously. Protocol 7, emergency sequence. These bobbies don't wait until midnight. They die right now while you watch. And I make sure the evidence shows that you triggered it, that your illegal break-in, your tampering with medical equipment, caused a catastrophic system failure that killed 23 children. The room fell silent. Victoria looked at the bobbies, at their tiny chests rising and falling, at the devices counting down their lives. She looked at Daniel, who was crying silently. At James, whose tactical mind was surely calculating odds and finding them all bad. At Senator Rodriguez and Agent Chen, who had the power of government behind them but were just as helpless in this moment. Morrison was going to win. He'd thought of everything, planned for every contingency. They'd walked into his trap thinking they were rescuing children, but all they'd done was give him the perfect opportunity to eliminate every witness at once. You have 10 seconds, Morrison said. Then I press the button. This is it. This is the moment where everything either comes together or falls apart. What would you do? How do you fight someone who's thought of everything? Comment below, because what Victoria does next is something nobody, including Morrison, saw coming. Victoria's mind raced. There had to be something, some angle Morrison hadn't considered, some weakness in his perfect plan. She thought about her daughter Sophie, about the accident that had never made sense. She thought about the car that had swerved into their lane, about the investigation that had concluded too quickly, about the insurance payout that had been suspiciously generous. And suddenly she understood. You killed my daughter, Victoria said quietly. Morrison's expression didn't change, but something flickered in Dr. Caldwell's eyes. Confirmation. Sophie wasn't an accident. You needed to test an early version of the device, something that could cause a stroke or heart attack in a moving vehicle. You chose her because I'd been investigating your company's drug trials, getting too close to your other experiments. So you killed her and made it look like an accident. And then you watched me spend 15 years blaming myself, becoming exactly the kind of person who wouldn't ask questions anymore. Ms. Ashford, Morrison said, and now his voice held an edge. You're wasting your time with wild accusations. Except I can prove it. Victoria pulled out her phone. Because 5 years ago I hired a private investigator to look into Sophie's death. He found something interesting. A witness who saw a man near my car the morning of the accident. A man matching Dr. Caldwell's description. A man who was seen attaching something to my car's undercarriage. She looked at Caldwell. I never knew what to do with that information. Until now. Morrison's jaw tightened. That proves nothing. Maybe not, but it's enough to start an investigation. And here's what else I have. Financial records showing payments from Morrison Pharmaceuticals to Judge Hoffman, to Police Commissioner Williams, to a dozen other officials you've bought over the years. I've been compiling evidence on you for 5 years, Marcus. Ever since James told me about the classified military programs you were connected to. Ever since I realized that my daughter's death and your research timeline matched up too perfectly to be coincidence. Morrison's hand moved toward Dr. Caldwell's tablet. You're bluffing. Am I? Victoria smiled, and it was cold as winter. James, would you like to tell Mr. Morrison who you've been sending data to for the last 30 minutes? James held up his phone. The data from those devices is currently being live-streamed to 3 different secure servers, one in Iceland, one in Switzerland, one in New Zealand, all in countries with strong whistleblower protections. And the stream includes timestamp verification, blockchain authentication, and digital signatures that prove when and where it was recorded. Morrison's face finally showed emotion, rage. You can't. But wait, there's more, Victoria continued, her voice gaining strength. Elizabeth, you want to show him. The journalist held up her camera. We've been live streaming to the Times secure server since we entered this room. Encrypted, backed up in real time, with over 200,000 viewers watching right now through our emergency broadcast system, including several members of Congress, the Attorney General, and interestingly enough, the CEO of Morrison Pharmaceuticals' main competitor, who I called specifically to make sure he was watching. Senator Rodriguez stepped forward. And I've been texting with the Senate Majority Leader for the last 10 minutes. There are currently senators being woken up across the country, being briefed on what we're seeing here. By sunrise, there will be calls for emergency hearings. Your company's stock will be suspended from trading, and every judge, every official, every person you've bought will be scrambling to distance themselves from you. Agent Chen smiled grimly. And I've been recording every word you've said, Mr. Morrison, including your admission that you're holding these children hostage. That alone is enough to ensure you never see daylight as a free man again. Morrison stood frozen, his mind clearly racing through scenarios, trying to find the move that would save him. But for once in his carefully orchestrated life, there wasn't one. You should also know, Victoria said, stepping closer to him, that I sent copies of all the evidence, including your financial records, the witness testimony about my daughter's death, and documentation of every illegal test subject you've used, to the FBI, the CIA, the Department of Defense Inspector General, and about 40 different news organizations. If anything happens to any of us, if those bobbies die, if you so much as think about pressing that button, all of it goes public immediately. Your entire empire crashes. Your government connections throw you under the bus to save themselves, and you spend whatever life you have left in a supermax prison, wondering how you let a bitter woman outsmart you. The room was silent except for the soft beeping of infant monitors. Morrison looked at his tablet, at the button that would kill 23 children and destroy everyone in the room. Victoria saw him calculating, saw the exact moment he realized he'd lost. You destroyed everything, Morrison said quietly. My company, my reputation, my life's work. For what? 23 children who would have died anyway, 23 meaningless. Daniel moved faster than anyone expected. He crossed the room and hit Morrison with enough force to send the older man stumbling backward. Then he stood over him, this 16-year-old boy who'd carried impossible burdens, and spoke with a voice that carried the weight of everyone Morrison had hurt. They're not meaningless, they're people, and you're finished. If you're feeling what I'm feeling right now, this overwhelming sense of justice, hit that like button and share this video with everyone you know. Because stories like this need to be heard. Crimes like this need to be exposed. The next hour was chaos. More FBI agents arrived, then police, then ambulances to transport the bobbies to a real hospital. Medical teams carefully removed each device under Dr. Jonathan Reeves' supervision, flown in by helicopter when Agent Chen explained the situation. News crews converged on the facility from every network, and by the time the sun rose, the story was breaking worldwide. Victoria stood outside the facility watching the organized chaos, Daniel beside her holding his brother and sister, now officially named Alex and Emma, after their maternal grandparents. James had disappeared into a car with several serious-looking federal agents, probably to answer questions about exactly how he'd hacked into a secured facility. Senator Rodriguez was already on phone calls, demanding emergency congressional hearings. Morrison and Dr. Caldwell were in federal custody. The other people involved, the guards, the scientists, the officials who'd taken bribes, were being rounded up across the city. Victoria's evidence had opened cases that would take years to fully prosecute, but the core truth was out. Morrison Pharmaceuticals had been running illegal human experiments, and powerful people had helped them do it. "What happens now?" Daniel asked quietly. "Now you get to be a kid again." Victoria said, "You and your brother and sister. I'm setting up a trust fund for you, enough to ensure you're taken care of, that you can go to school, have a real life. Jonathan has agreed to be your legal guardian if you're comfortable with that." Daniel nodded, tears streaming down his face. "And you, what will you do?" Victoria looked at the sunrise painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. For the first time in 15 years, she felt something she'd thought was dead: hope. "I'm going to spend every dollar I have, every connection I've made, every ounce of influence I've built to find out how deep this goes." Morrison wasn't acting alone. There are more people involved, more programs like this one, and I'm going to expose all of it. She smiled. Turns out being a bitter woman who never got over her daughter's death is exactly the right qualification for this job. Elizabeth Park approached, her camera crew still filming. "Ms. Ashford, can I get a statement?" Victoria looked directly at the camera, at the millions of people who would see this footage. "To everyone watching, question everything. The charities you donate to, the corporations you trust, the officials you elect, question all of it. Because evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like a humanitarian. Sometimes it wears a suit and donates to children's hospitals while murdering children in secret. Stay vigilant, stay angry, and never, ever stop fighting for the truth." The camera kept rolling as behind Victoria, 23 bobbies were loaded into ambulances, their devices removed, their lives no longer counting down to midnight. Daniel held his brother and sister close, finally able to breathe, finally able to hope. And somewhere in federal custody, Marcus Morrison sat in a cell, his empire crumbling, his carefully constructed lies exposed to the light, understanding too late that the woman whose daughter he'd murdered had been the wrong person to underestimate. 3 months later, Victoria stood in her office, looking at the wall she'd turned into a monument to unfinished business. Photos, documents, connection maps, all the evidence of other programs, other experiments, other powerful people who thought they were untouchable. Her company had survived the scandal. In fact, Ashford Industries' stock had soared when investors realized she'd been the one to expose Morrison. Calls had poured in from whistleblowers, from families of disappeared children, from former employees with stories to tell. She'd become something she'd never expected: a crusader. Daniel visited twice a week, always with updates on Alex and Emma, who were thriving under Jonathan's care. The Bobbies had fully recovered, with no lasting damage from their devices. All 23 children from the facility had been placed in loving homes, their identities protected, their futures secured. Morrison was awaiting trial on 847 charges. Dr. Caldwell had taken a plea deal in exchange for testimony. 17 government officials had resigned. The Department of Defense had launched an investigation into their classified programs that was causing shockwaves through the military-industrial complex. But Victoria knew this was just the beginning. There were more facilities, more children, more monsters wearing humanitarian masks. Her phone rang, James's number. "I found something," he said without preamble. "A facility in Arizona. Same setup, different corporation, but the funding traces back to the same shadow group that was backing Morrison. Victoria felt that familiar fire in her chest. How many children? 38. She looked at her wall, at the faces of the innocent, at the connections she'd mapped. Send me everything you have. I'll make some calls. Because this was who she was now, not just a CEO, not just a bereaved mother seeking revenge. She was the person who stopped monsters. She was the person who saved children that the world wanted to forget. And she was just getting started. Thank you for watching this entire story. If it moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you that one person really can make a difference, please subscribe to this channel, share this video, and leave a comment about what you're going to do differently because of what you've learned today. Stories like this matter. Truth matters. And together, we can make sure the monsters don't win. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay compassionate, and never stop fighting for what's right.